of oil, and you carry around with you a bucket of water. And in the art of leadership, we have to decide which bucket should we use when the pressure is on and when the fire is blazing. All right? We have to decide. Now, I'll say this. There are times where you are going to use the oil. And you are going to use the oil when people need to be motivated. When people need to be fired up. Okay? When the fire, like the passion fire, right? The passion fire. If it's a passion fire and it's not blazing very strong, you might have to pour the oil to cause that to blaze, okay? But when we think of most fires, we think of fires that are not good, right? These are the fires that if they spread, they are going to do damage. And as a leader, when things are on fire, when your house is burning down, which bucket are you going to choose? Thank you. I hope so. The water. So the crisis is escalating. Relational tensions are building. The last thing that you want to do is pour the oil on, right? The oil in this case it's things like losing control, lashing out in anger. Sometimes it's being passive aggressive. What are some other things? What's like using the oil, on the fire? Any other thoughts?
Reacting, not responding.
Reacting, not responding. Absolutely.
Just engaging in the first place.
Sometimes it's engaging, right? So sometimes somebody else lights the fire, and right there you have a choice like, well, am I going to keep it going, or what am I going to do? So this is the time when the water is needed, because the water is going to quickly de-escalate the fire. When tensions are rising, it takes more effort, doesn't it, sometimes, to keep from responding in anger and instead choose to be, and this is Oswald Sanders' words. He has a lot of great words, by the way. He says, calm in crisis and resilient in disappointment. When we're in crisis, we may have to take a step back. We might have to take a deep breath before we make a decision, or let that decision make us instead, which sometimes they do. So I have another mission story. Trust the leader in our lives again. Sometimes on missions, we would have somebody that did something, and we knew that they did it, but they wouldn't confess that they did it, And so what we would have to do is we'd actually kind of stay up a little later at night and ask them to come into the room so we could talk to them about it. And we'd start kind of asking some questions, basic questions about timeline, usually. Like, well, what happened around this time? Where were you? And, those kind of things. And, but sometimes there were some guys that were so manipulative. And you just inside, you would start feeling your blood pressure just boil, because they were not going to tell you anything, right? And so you're just getting so mad because you know that they did whatever it was, And one of our leaders said, what I had to do sometimes is I had to just say, I need to go get a drink of water. Because he would feel that rising up inside of him, that tension. And he knew he was just going to blow if he kept going. And that he was going to ruin the whole thing. He was going to blow it, right? And so he would stop. He'd be like, hey, I need to go get a drink of water. My throat's dry really quick. He'd walk down the hallway. And just in that moment, just those few moments, to be able to stop and think and really choose how he was going to respond when he went back into the room were really, really necessary, And so sometimes we might have to do that. I think of Jesus. Jesus was the master, wasn't he? Because here he is on this road, on this journey to the cross. And in the critical moments before his death, think about how he could have responded. And think about how he did when he was falsely accused, when he was being tortured. How many times did he lash back at his accusers? 0. The goose egg. Instead, in fact, when he was teaching us, what did he teach us to do when our enemies were coming against us? He said, turn the other cheek. You know, some of us are like, well, I don't know about that. We have a hard time with that one, don't we? Like, turn the other cheek? Really? But that's what he said. And that's what he did. And then I think of Stephen. You remember Stephen. Stephen knew all about Jesus. And here he was. Stephen's getting ready to be stoned. Actually, he was being stoned. He didn't lash back. He didn't fight back. He took it. But you know where his eyes were? And do you know where his mind was? And do you know where his spirit was during this? It was all up. He had God in focus. And when he had God in view, he knew how he needed to respond in that situation. And we have a powerful example. I've never had stones thrown at me. I've had words thrown at me. And yet, I still want to lash back. I mean, that's like nothing compared to what these guys had. You know what I mean? How do we respond when things get tense? Romans 12:17, it reminds us. Listen to this passage. Because in this one passage, it's like I could break this up into several different messages, okay? But listen to this, because there's so many points. It reminds us, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. Okay? If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with the people that you like. Okay, is it up there on the screen? I kind of misread that, didn't I? Sorry, I meant everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. Okay, let God take care of it. Because you might be angry, but God is also angry at injustice. God does not like injustice any more than you do. Especially toward you, you know? Leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, I love this, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. Did you hear that? I tried to put the mic closer. On the contrary, and then he quotes Proverbs 25. He says, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, Willie, sorry. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals upon his head. Okay, have you heaped burning coals? No, but you have. Emotionally, it's the same. Okay? And do not overcome evil by evil, but overcome evil with good. Okay. When I was in high school, we were the Thunderbirds, okay? We had this cheer squad called the Thunderettes. They were, I know, right? They were phenomenal, like really great cheer squad. Well, we had our rival school, you know, we all had the rival school. So I was Bellevue West and they were Bellevue East, and their team was called the Belvedettes. Kind of a goofy name, but anyway. One time, you know how you in high school, you kind of get those big rolls of paper and you get your paints and you do posters and you put them up in the hallways and stuff like that. So one time, the Belvedettes wrote really nasty things about the Thunderettes, about our team. And they put them up around the school. Now, I mean, I'm really surprised that their administration let them do that. And I don't remember what they said. but they were really cruel. You know what I mean? And word got out. Word got back to our school that these posters were up there. You know, we're going to hear about it, right? Because this is like tension between these two schools. But I was so amazed at how our squad responded. Because, you know, they totally could have like fired back and been really cruel. And, you know, that's usually what schools do, right? Somebody on our team had their wits about them. And what they said is, you know what we need to do? They baked cookies for the other school's team and like delivered these cookies with notes of encouragement for them. And I was like, that is powerful. Like, talk about heaping coals on their heads, like killing them with kindness, right? And I think it's such a powerful story of how we can respond when we're hurt or when we're in crisis. Our response to pressure is a great time to be Christ-like. And you know what? People are so surprised when we respond that way, right? They're like, hey, what happened to you? Like, why are you not mad at me, you know? So here are some ways. I was thinking about, like, what are some ways that we can maintain our self-control, okay? The first one I think is the most important of them. And that is that you decide in advance how you will respond to a situation where self-control is required. You have to decide who you are going to be. You have to decide what kind of character. And I can tell you, our response is pretty predictable. If you want to know how you usually respond in a crisis, ask some people who are close to you. They can tell you. I promise. They can tell you. What happens when you're squeezed? Pastor and leadership guru John Maxwell, he said this: the first victory that successful people ever achieve or win is the victory over themselves. The moment we begin to have victory over our own flesh and our own desires and become self-controlled, then all of a sudden we become victorious in other areas of our lives. See, when you get that foundation of self-control, it becomes a platform for like this momentum in our lives that affects other things in our lives positively. Jesus said that, he said this. He said that the person that does what he says, that person is solid. This is the person who's disciplined to hear Jesus and obey Jesus. So listen to this verse. Luke 6:47. It's actually the continuation of the verse I read earlier. Okay. As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. Okay, so they're laying a foundation, but they're putting the foundation on a solid foundation, right? And when a flood came, the torrent struck that house, but could not shake it because it was well built. And then you know the other one. The other one is the guy who built his house upon the sand, right? We used to sing in Sunday school, the wise man built his house upon the rock. The wise man built his house upon the rock. Does anybody know that one? A few of you do. Yeah, you're singing it. All right. We should sing it together. No. All right. You are constantly building your house. And your house is your character. And your character is, does it look like Jesus or does it not look like Jesus, basically? When someone is a first responder, has anybody here been a first responder, a firefighter, or a policeman or anything? At first aid, you know, those are the guys that are scouts over here. You guys have done first aid stuff, right? And, you know, when you're a first responder, you get thrown into a situation, right? You don't know when it's going to happen, but it happens at a moment, and you have to know when to respond. Now, let's say that you needed first aid, personally. Who do you want responding to your crisis? Do you want the person who is like, hey, you're going to be a first responder. When somebody has a need, just go ahead and take care of it? Or would you rather have the person that they're a first responder, but they've had hours and hours of training to know